Good morning. Today is Friday, May 10th, 2024. I'm Eric Blank, and this is the Commissioners' Deliberation Meeting and proceeding 23A-0392EG, the Public Service Company of Colorado Clean Heat Plan. Mr. Mendelson, Ms. Dundas, you want to get us started? Oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Mike Mendelson of your advisory staff. My colleagues Jesse Shula, Dan Greenberg, and Commission Counsel Lindsay Dundas and Wendy Rosati are here to assist you. Today is the fourth deliberation of Public Services Clean Heat Plan. At this week's CDM, you shared your perspectives on total budget to facilitate the CHP. I've summarized those positions and distributed the summary to each of you. Today, I'll ask you if you have any additional comments for your colleagues, but will likely not take a vote on final budgets until the end of today's CDM. We'll then pick up where we left off in the decision matrix, starting with the SEAMS issues. Hopefully we'll complete most of the decision matrix in the time allotted. However, we'll likely need a final cleanup at the 515 CWM. Before I turn it over to you, I'd like to just note that the annual budgets in particular, while well-intentioned, have numerous uncertainties given BE and DSM are customer-driven resources, and the company's programs are not likely to incorporate changes decided in this proceeding until late in the year, if not 2025. Therefore, I believe we have to take annual budgets with a large grain of salt. With that, I'll turn it to you, Chair Blank.
Yeah, I have two follow-up questions for you both from our budget conversations the other day. The first has to do with the cost cap. The statute says, and I'm quoting now, that the commission may approve or amend and approve a clean heat plan with costs greater than the cost cap, only if it finds that the plan is in the public interest, costs to customers are reasonable. The plan includes mitigation of rate increases for income qualified customers, and the benefits of the plan, including the social cost of methane and carbon dioxide, exceed the cost. Now that I understand the plan and budget that you both generally support, and now that there's a rate impact model that is adapted to your budget, I'm concerned that your proposed budget by itself may not include adequate mitigation of rate increases for IQ customers. As we discussed last Wednesday, the company's rate impact model, as adapted by advisors and myself, suggests that this proposed budget may put us on a trajectory to roughly double rates in the coming years and as much as quadruple them over the long run. Given that we may be greatly increasing the long-term rate trajectory for hundreds of thousands of IQ customers, many of whom may have little cost-effective options to electrify, and given that the PIP programs serve only 20% of the total eligible customers, or tens of thousands out of hundreds of thousands, according to the PIP evaluation we just discussed earlier this week, I'm increasingly sharing the concerns of staff, UCA, and CEC that the EOC PIP proposal by itself may not be adequate to satisfy the IQ income qualified statutory rate mitigation criteria for the budget you're proposing. At the same time, by creating the potential to ratchet back the budget in the out years and having the option to slow the investment ramp as I was proposing on Wednesday, the rate impact analysis shows a much less pronounced increase. For me, this potentially reduced rate increase, coupled with the EOC PIP proposal, better satisfies the statutory rate impact mitigation criteria for income qualified customers. So I just ask you both to help me understand how you think the EOC proposal is sufficient to mitigate the large potential increases in the rate trajectory, particularly for the hundreds of thousands of IQ customers that likely can't cost effectively electrify and won't participate in PIP programs. The second question is just to ask you if you believe that the company fundamentally shares your vision of the future of the natural gas LDC business. To the extent you don't believe there is complete alignment, I just ask you if you're concerned about the company's role as a steward for your vision in these funds. As I view your proposals, they provide relatively limited ability for us to direct and reorient $650 million in spending over the next 5 years. So I just ask if you can help me understand why it wouldn't be a good idea, especially in light of the potential misalignment on the larger vision, to revisit the large spending ramp up in a couple of years, as I've suggested. So I'll just start with you, Commissioner Gilman, and see if you can help me on those two questions: how we're going to mitigate the rate impacts for IQ customers as required by the statute, and two, if you're concerned about turning this much control over to the company for 5 years. So just turn it over to you.
Sure. Well, good morning. Happy 4th
Morning.
deliberation morning. Could be our first ever 5 deliberation proceeding. So
we're breaking records.
breaking records. So while I understand your concerns, to me, look, I take interest in the long-term model that the company has provided. I think I prompted that question in Supplemental Direct to get that document. But in the end, I've spent months, literal months, looking at that model and tweaking it and looking at different options. And I've come to the conclusion, I can't base my decision in very large part today on that document, which I think has several assumptions that I wouldn't endorse, some with major implications in the out years, and some areas that even appear to calculate incorrectly to me. So I don't give that probably the amount of weight you're giving it in this portion of the deliberation. I will say, I mean, more largely, this issue that we're talking about, that we're spending our 4th meeting talking about, is really hard. It's really hard. I mean, we have been tasked with taking a system that's entire purpose is to take a fossil fuel and deliver it for people to burn and work to decarbonize the system that is inherently a fossil fuel burning business model. And so it feels difficult because it is quite difficult. And as I pointed out before, I think the future is in question for a number of reasons. We have emerging technologies and efficient technologies that can replace this in the marketplace, as well as the influx of a significant amount of federal money for exactly that purpose, to try to electrify customers. So I think a lot of what we're seeing in these models also is a result of a drop in throughput rather than necessarily the exact size of this very first plan period that we're here to evaluate. It's probably easier to focus on the things that are very clear in this adjudication before us. To me, it's clear that BE and DSM are the most cost-effective resources to reduce carbon on the system. I think that point we all agreed upon. And this points to a future in which we must reduce the throughput of that system. That presents a structural challenge to any business when the future looks like reducing sales of the product you have. You either have to cut expenses or probably retool up the business structure or face higher costs on that system. I think that's a fundamental fact kind of associated with this that we're going to have to grapple with and going to have to continue to look to in the future. But we're at the very beginning of this. And so I want to focus on our task here today, and indeed in 5 sessions, is to really set out the plan through this plan period, which is through 2028. We're not setting a long-term vision, although I think we can be informed by how things look. Our job today is not to sit here and set every incentive, every trajectory all the way through 2050. I don't think there's any way we possibly can. There's too much that we don't know. So our job is to focus on this plan period. Do we meet the statutory requirements for the rate cap? And how do we see that vision playing out over the next several years to set us on the most successful trajectory? And so for your first question on how is it sufficient for rate mitigation, I got into this in some detail the other day, where I think you have to look at electrification of IQ customers, I think, has the potential to prevent rather than cause a significant amount of harm here, especially as Commissioner Plant pointed out the other day with kind of the roller coaster of natural gas commodity prices that have been particularly painful, especially for our most vulnerable customers. as well as really the prospect of not seeing any plan to cut expenses on the gas system. I think we have to be very mindful, of that direction. And if we don't take a hard look at how those customers electrify kind of as part of this plan and as putting a significant amount of the budget, as has been proposed, toward electrification of those very consumers, then I think there's a much higher risk. But to me, it appears that the greatest rate mitigation we can provide to those customers is to really provide robust programming to enable them to take advantage of these programs moving forward. And that anything that falls short of that is essentially locking in likely more investment in gas infrastructure, which falls on those customers as well as a future reliance on those gas commodity markets that have been troublesome in the past several years. To your second question about the company's role as a steward of the plan, yes, I am a bit concerned. So I've seen Boulder's suggestion that we look at third-party implementation of programming. I think we seriously consider that, especially as we evaluate their performance under this first plan period. That being said, I mean, we've seen some of these big plans like TEP and things set up. And what ends up happening, I was actually originally thinking we probably wanted a relatively short first plan period here so we can see how it's going and retool. But I do also recognize that it takes a while to stand up these programs. And it can be very difficult to have like any sort of reliable data or outcomes when you've got a program that's only functioned for a year or so. And so that's like the friction or the rub there is in how do we ensure that we actually have kind of reliable data on something we're doing for the very first time so that we can make intelligent decisions the next time around. So I do have concerns if they share the vision here. I do have concerns if they have honestly such a significant conflict of interest in this that they cannot really promote the types of programs that achieve the policy objective here. But it's probably premature to decide that today. And I think, what's before us, and no one's really suggested some major structural change to how this would be delivered, short of Boulder suggesting that we look to third-party implementation pending the results of this first plan period, I think. So, that would tend to be the route I would go is look at this first plan period. I think we need to set some very obvious performance objectives here. And if there are issues there, I think third-party implementation of the plan is a very reasonable thing we need to be looking at in the next plan cycle if we don't get where we think we should be getting.
Well, as someone who has no ductwork in his house and who has forced water heat, I think there's going to be hundreds of thousands of IQ customers that are not going to be eligible for electrification in any type of reasonable time frame.
Electrify. I mean, you can electrify a hydronic system, I guess I would say.
Putting that aside, help me understand why we just can't, like in 2026, take another look at that. I mean, what I'm suggesting is just approve a range and then just look at where we are and what we want to do within that range in a couple of years once we have more information. What's the problem with creating that optionality? Why do you want to set this on a 5-year ramp without the option to look at this again in a couple of years?
Look, I think it's a possibility. You have to consider in 2025, we'll have the DSM BESI filing, which looks and feels a whole lot like a clean heat proceeding at this point, given the dramatic overlap of resources in each. So I think we need to think long and hard about some of the discussion on what is the integration between these processes. So we've got that coming in 2025, and then another GIP coming in 2025 as well. So I'm not saying it's impossible to look at it in 2026. I'm saying it's highly likely we won't have very useful data. So if we want to make big decisions about like, is the company achieving their objective? Are they in alignment with what we're doing? It may be too soon to tell which I gotta be honest, like really pains me to say. But I've been around long enough. These things take a while to get implemented and to go. The other thing I'll point out is just giving a budget range. I think we'd have to be incredibly specific about what the range is for and what it's used for. You know, as we're seeing in the ongoing DSMBE proceeding, the company essentially appears to have just taken the flexibility that we provided, tacked it onto the budget, and called that the new budget. So I won't give an opinion on this. It's being adjudicated right now. But if you give a range, I think it appears to me highly likely the company will take the top part of your range as the budget. And
I'm
so do you
thinking
end
that.
up in the same fundamental place as me anyway? Under that
I
approach, I think is my question.
I think the bottom edge of the range is a ceiling without further approval. But I don't know, Commissioner Plant, you want to jump in here where you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I would agree with some of the comments that Commissioner Gilman said as far as, reliability on the modeling. And, I'm not sure I know exactly. I have a sense of where the company is in their sort of commitment to achieving these objectives. My sense is they're kind of where they were with the electric side, maybe 15 years ago. What they've done is they've figured out how to make a clean energy future work on the electric side. And I imagine that eventually they will figure out a way to make a clean heat system work on the heating side, but they're certainly not there yet. And I think that they're probably going to drag their feet, which is one of the reasons that I'm concerned about their program design, which we've had a lot of discussions about. In terms of the IQ side, I think we've discussed a variety of things that I think will address the IQ side pretty significantly. And in looking at the budgets, honestly, through 2026, there's not a lot of difference. I think
I'm fine through 2026. It's
no, I
the
know.
range at 27 and 28 that's bugging
Well,
me.
yeah, and that's my point. So, in the primary difference is the flex budget. And I think that's kind of, I mean, my sense was what we were doing is establishing a kind of a base budget through 2028, and then we were going to reevaluate at the end of 2026 to see how and if the flex components of the budget would be allocated. And a lot of that's going to be in looking at the success of deployment of the programs across that time, because honestly, we can't even get an agreement on how much a furnace costs, which seems to me to be just an amazing statement right there. So, trying to understand what the level of adoption will be, by the end of 2026 at this point, I think we just don't know. And so, I see the point at which the budgets somewhat diverge is that point of evaluation. And, the allocation of a flex budget, which, we're going to be able to evaluate at the end of 2026 to cover those last couple of years of implementation based on, the success rate going forward. The other thing that I would add, and this is one of the ways in which I was trying to address some of the bill concerns, and it is, I really think we need to be tying together DSM and the electrification efforts. And that's why I put a little bit higher DSM budget. I think clearly, number one, we see DSM is the most cost-effective, least risky investment there is out there. Number two, we're anticipating really high levels of BE adoption, and you know, that's going to require a very strong, very robust program to get that BE out there and growing at the rate that we are anticipating. And I think that we lose a real opportunity if we don't tie that together with DSM at the same time. And you know, the DSM in combination with the BE, I think, is the greatest opportunity that we have for mitigating potential bill increases to customers. And I think that we could actually, you know, reduce overall costs, certainly reduce risk as it's associated with the commodity prices, but really increase our level of DSM in Colorado, which I think is something that is necessary.
Well, let me ask you this. Say, would you be open to, so as I see it, you've proposed $460 million in firm budget through 2028. Would you be open to reducing that sum, putting more in the flex budget, and making access to the flex budget contingent on a 2026 decision? And I mean, just listening to this, I think we should move the DSM SI proceeding to 2026 and combine it into a single thing that is more looking at beneficial electrification and DSM. But putting that aside, I sort of like your budget better than Commissioner Gilman's because there's more in the flex budget. And it sounds like you're open to a 2026 process to take a look at this. So any thoughts on that, Commissioner
Yeah,
Plant?
well, I think there's some pluses and there's some minuses to my approach, frankly. I'm not sure how they balance out, and I'd love to get your guys' perspective on it. I mean, what my approach was to put in basically a flat amount of funding
I
across.
love because I'm
Well,
worried about the ramp.
well, I mean, you know, you can love it or hate it, and I think there's reasons for both. I mean, honestly, I have a much higher budget for BE, for example, in 25 than either one of you do because it's flat, right? So it's higher at the front end, it's a little lower in the back end, but then you have the flex budget to add to it in the event that, you know, the adoption is much greater. And what that presumes is that you're going to give a greater amount of flexibility across years, you know, for the implementation of the budget, just because, you know, we don't know what the level of adoption is going to be. And, you know, maybe it will be closer to, you know, what you and Commissioner Gilman are anticipating for 2025. And there's, you know, $30 million that is unspent in 2025 that would move towards 2026. That's, you know, the flatness of my budget is basically acknowledging that we don't know how the program uptake will be, and that we would want to incorporate that kind of flexibility. You know, there's advantages and there's disadvantages to that. Honestly, I don't know how it balances out, but would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I am much happier with your budget than Commissioner Gilman's. That's like at $200 million in 2028. It's just for me that trajectory just puts us on a really problematic rate impact path. So I guess I'm another vote for Commissioner Plant's budget with a concurrence expressing significant concern about what we're doing. And I think we should at least ask the question of whether we want to move that 2025 DSM SI proceeding into 2026 and combine it with this. Commissioner Gilman, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I see it. The overlap between DSM and BE is it's getting difficult to think through, right? Because especially, I mean, this clean heat plan is primarily looking like a DSM and BE plan with a little bit of recovered methane at this point. So there is a ton of overlap. Just keep in mind in 2026, we'll have maybe 1 year of useful data. That's given a lot of credit for how quickly these programs will get off the ground. So it will be a very limited look at what is working, what's not, and kind of data to support, I think, what you want to be major decision making in that year. So that's, I mean, generally, I told you, I had gone into this like thinking, yeah, sooner will probably be better, so we can retool and figure out what's going on. But in seeing past experiences, I just realized you end up with very little data to make those decisions. So I based my budget off an actual modeling run, which was the flex base with the AC replacement and no incentive scalar, which is essentially the scenario that we all discussed and voted on the particulars of those two adjustments as being reasonable. So I personally like the defensibility of where the budget came from here. I think it's much more realistic that you do have a ramp. That just kind of is how this will work as more contractors and more equipment becomes available. I think it's a much more realistic adoption curve than a flat budget. But I did want to make one point. All this talk of the budget, I think something gets lost. Obviously, the budget's important. I think the goal is more or less the actual outcomes, the actual progress, the actual reductions that we expect. And there is essentially a unit cost in which we link that back to a budget. And the budget's important to think about, but I don't want it to get lost. Like the goal here is not go spend this much money. The goal is get these results within a budget that is prescribed essentially as a guardrail. And so I worry we might be framing the discussion in a way that kind of doesn't do justice with what the actual goal is here. It's not to spend a set budget, is to get a set amount of results. And the budget would be essentially the guardrail, the maximum in a current year that you could utilize to get those results that more or less sets us on a path to hit the statutory targets by 2030, all with a plan that, you know, taking a base of a plan where even the company testified that the benefits exceed the costs. And what we've largely done is looked at modifications that enhance the most cost-effective resource areas and took away the least cost-effective resource areas. So certainly that situation has only improved in terms of the benefit and cost ratio.
Well, I think there is a difference, maybe among the three of us. I mean, for me, the electric transition took, 20 or 25 years. And if we tried to jam it into 5 years or 10 years, it would have been enormously expensive, given the cost curves on both wind and solar and the fact that you didn't have storage. But by allowing that to play out over an extended time period, we really got to a good result. And I'm just worried, we're trying to jam too much into 5 years in a way that is inconsistent with the statutory requirement to mitigate rate impacts on IQ customers, where I don't think there is any adequate answer. But I guess, Commissioner Plan, are you willing to stick with your budget if you get a second vote?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think they largely, honestly, I think they largely accomplish the same thing. I think that the review in at the end of 2026 is, an essential component of the entire picture and looking how we move forward through 27 and 28. And I also, I think that, having the DSM plan move to 26, I would be fine with that. I have some other thoughts about that issue, which we can talk about, which, relates to, sort of maybe retooling that, and retooling this and retooling the DSP, in terms of riders. I mean, we've got, you know, really the DSM, as you know, Commissioner Gilman pointed out, the DSM is DSM, BE, and DR. I think DR is going to largely fall towards that DSP, or I think that the new legislation calls it grid modernization rider. You know, those costs are going to could be consolidated within there. I think, you know, our riders that are, you know, currently in the DSMCA maybe can be consolidated under this, so that we can minimize the number of riders, and sort of as it's shaking out right now, you know, there's a lot of overlap and a lot of things that are being recovered in various different places. I think we could, over the next couple of years, try and consolidate process wise. But yeah,
It's a tough record to figure out what to do with the riders. So Commissioner
and the
Gilman.
the other point I wanted to make is I really think that, you know, one of the things that, I mean, we're obviously not going to any kind of a third party system, you know, like Energy Trust of Oregon or something like that, along those lines. You know, that would take a full blown proceeding. But I think what we can do at the end of 2026, when we're doing this review, is kind of evaluate the success to which these programs are being implemented, and indicate to the parties in the upcoming DSM that that's either something that we want to that we would be interested in pursuing or not, and then start, you know, to invite the interveners to develop a record around how that might be developed and implemented. But I think we need to give the company an opportunity to you know, live up to the promises of the overall CHP first.
Well, I don't know that we're going to vote right now. Maybe we'll wait till the end, but before we move on, it sounds like there's potentially 2 votes for Commissioner Plant's budget. Commissioner Gilman, any final comments before we move to the next issue?
Yeah, especially I guess given the that Commissioner Plant, your budget kind of honestly front loads more electrification. The 24 and 25 budgets are higher than the modeling had showed was likely. I mean, what would happen to those budgets that presumably would go at least partially unused in the early years, assuming adoption's not there yet?
That's what I was bringing up. I think the difference here between a flat budget is an acknowledgement that we don't know what the adoption rates are going to be like, and that we might need to provide some flexibility between years for those budgets to carry forward and be applied, as you know, as we saw, you know, we've seen in a variety of different cases, but we certainly saw on the TEP, you know, it took a while to get to the point of adoption, and then once we got to adoption, then, you know, there was an increase in uptake. And I think that, you know, depending on what the program design looks like from the company, depending on the marketing and the, you know, the outreach looks like, and you know, cooperation with the Energy Office and their outreach, and integration with the IRA incentives that are coming, you know, all that sort of thing is going to really drive adoption. And I don't know how fast it's going to come, but I think it's not going to be a sort of a linear thing. I think it's going to be somewhat lumpy.
So I mean, I guess that considered, I'm a little bit struggling for no offense, Commissioner Plant, I'm struggling for the benefit of a plan that shows essentially flat adoption, when we all know it wouldn't be flat. Like, there will be a ramp up as there's more availability. And if the money would just transfer from year to year or move forward if unused, I'm now struggling how that's different than a modeled approach that actually shows the ramp.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm pointing out, is that there are positives and negatives to it. One is it acknowledges we don't know when and how much the adoption, you know, increase is going to be and when it's going to happen. at the same time, it allocates, I mean, if you compare my budget and your budget, Commissioner Gilman, I'm in 2025, I'm at 131 million, you're at 105 million. So I have a higher budget in 25 because I'm making, you're making 54.8 million available for electrification, and I'm still making 80 because 80 is sort of the flat number. The assumption is that some of that's going to carry forward into 2026 and just be added to the money that's available there. That's when, the difference between our two budgets drop down to 5 million, but the idea is that, the money will adjust to the adoption as opposed to trying to anticipate when and how much that adoption is going to be.
But you're not suggesting like that the company intentionally over collect on the rider. Like my assumption is they would just collect whatever is appropriate for their budget in that year.
Right.
So I guess I struggle how it functionally doesn't end up looking exactly the same as what I've shown. In that, like, if you just put the money to a budget and the year it's gonna get used, you use a model that shows how quickly
it may end up looking the same, Commissioner Gillen. I don't know. I think it's, a question of authorization versus appropriation.
I mean, for me, Commissioner Plant's budget gives us much more control over the out years in 2026, and he's not showing a $200 million budget in 2028, which I think is just too much given the statutory constraints. So I'm far more comfortable with Commissioner Plant's budget. All right. Well, unless you guys have anything else, why don't we move on? Although I don't know, you want to take a vote now, Mr. Mendelson, or you want to move on and come back to this?
I wanted to just mention a couple of items that advisors are thinking about. One is that I believe the commission has adopted the CEO roadmap of adoption of BE. So that like has this trajectory to it, and which just goes to the point that was being discussed about what the expected ramp is likely to be, that there's likely more adoption as we move on in the CHP time period. And I think Ms. Dundas will probably reiterate this, but to the extent we're modifying the check-in process in 26 and adding the strategic issues proceeding to that, and not necessarily against that idea, but it does complicate that check-in process, and perhaps moves it back to a full CHP. So I'm just concerned about that we would try to keep it narrow somehow so that we retain the flexibility and kind of efficiency benefits of that check-in process.
Although if you combine the DSM SI proceeding with this check-in, it takes two proceedings and turns it into one with a lot more information in front of us.
That's fine. Yeah, agreed. And if it goes to a full CHP, I mean, perhaps.
I don't think anybody wants a full CHP, which is the struggle because there's so much uncertainty. Ms. Dundas, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. What I was going to ask is pretty similar to Mr. Mendelson's first point, which is that we had a previous decision point about what's an appropriate adoption rate that the company should be using or planning towards. And I believe the decision point and the vote there was to use the CEO roadmap as a general understanding of the adoption rate. So is that now that we're going with a static budget proposal as opposed to the record suggestion of the flex base, which was a ramp up, do we have to change that vote?
No, I just think it's it's just we're going to try and reconcile it as best as we can. It's a balancing act between, for me at least, IQ customer rate impacts, spending, technology adoption, and I don't think it's necessarily inconsistent, especially given that we're okay shifting money from earlier years to later years. So I don't know, Commissioner Plant, would you say any different?
Yeah, I honestly, I think that we keep the roadmap as our target. I mean, there is something of a false precision in in the application of the model, because, I mean, in the testimony, what we were told was that the company came up with their budget based on the difference between, what the total cost of a heat pump was, for example, versus the cost of a furnace. Nobody can agree on the cost of a furnace. And then when I asked, are the incentives set to be the difference between the cost of the heat pump and the cost of the furnace? They said, no, that's just how we set our budget. So, a lot of this depends on how the programs are designed, what the cost per, carbon reduction is going to be. And that's why I kind of opted for the more flat budget, because I think there's a real false precision in the establishment of a budget when we don't even know what the programmatic costs are per measure.
Okay, well, since I'll be spending my weekend memorializing this discussion into the decision, like I think I'm tracking the discussion. I guess I'm just so can we say really concisely for frankly my benefit why we're keeping it static if the total is the same as the flex?
Because we're giving some flexibility to move it over time. And yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Plant.
No, I was just going to say across years.
Yeah.
I think we need to build that into our decision, right? Is the flexibility to move dollars across years.
Sorry about your weekend, Ms. Dundas.
That wasn't the concern. I just okay.
Really crappy weather anyway.
Yeah, it's just the understood. So we're not pointing to a portfolio in the record. We are designing the commission's choosing to design their own, and part of the feature of its own portfolio it's designing is that it's picked numbers for each year, but those numbers are essentially irrelevant because you can float all of it to the next year.
Yeah. Mr. Mendelson, you want to keep us moving, or do you have more?
Yeah,
on that?
well, I would just final point out, hopefully, but I would just say that Commissioner Gilman brought up that her idea was to essentially mirror the bench request and the modeling run that came out of that showed that was very cost effective and improved the cost effectiveness over prior runs. I think we could generally say that those modifications that we were required in the bench request are still relevant, and by flattening the budget, it doesn't necessarily reduce the cost effectiveness. We don't really know, but those improvements that we found out due to the bench request should still be relevant given this flat budget that we're adopting.
I agree with that.
Even though those modifications will not be presented or are not incorporated in the final budget.
Yeah.
Approved here.
Yeah.
It won't ramp, but the budget will still reflect the fact that when we reduce AC replacement constraint and the scalar mechanism, particularly the scalar mechanism, that we expect to receive cost effectiveness benefits and emission reductions generally consistent with the bench request run. Are you comfortable with general frame?
I'm comfortable with that, Commissioner Plant.
Yeah.
Commissioner Gilman, are you okay with that general way to frame it?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm not sure I'm prepared to vote on the budget piece until I confer with council and advisors. I don't think it's the best way to go, so I'll need to determine if I'll concur or not on the entire point.
I think that's fair.
And Commissioner Gilman, just one thing to point out, I think in the model that was shared on your budget, I think that the electrification wasn't backed out of market transformation prior to adding it back in.
With regard to the additional spending on the new construction MTP?
Yeah, your new construction is at 6x, but the
Yeah,
but
I
the
had
market
30 extra.
but the market transformation still has the initial 0.5, 2, 2, and 0.5.
Right. Yeah, I just chose to add 30 to it.
It'd be like 7x.
Yeah, in total. I mean, that was a range we were all considering. So that can go, I mean, it's dynamic, that can be changed and it'll change throughout. If we decide that 30 million extra is not the number, you know, it can be 25 million extra, whatever. And that's just changed. And I just proportioned it out by year, the way in which they'd shown it. That's why I was wondering, your MTP, Commissioner Plant, is lower.
Yeah, so what I did was I backed out the initial new construction and then added it back in at 6x.
I see.
So that's the difference. I did 6x and I think you did 7x
Yeah,
effectively.
got it.
All right, Mr. Mendelson.
Alrighty.
Even
So back to the decision matrix, we were on SEAMS issues, and the first item under SEAMS issues was program availability, whether that's only to combination customers or also includes gas only customers as well. I know we discussed it. I'm not sure we got a specific vote. So the question goes back to, does the commission agree to limit BE programming to combination customers, or should BE programming be available to gas only customers as well?
if we're doing an M docket, I might throw this one in the M docket. But I don't know that my colleagues agree. Commissioner Plant, what do you want to do on this one?
Yeah, I mean, my preference is to do it for all customers, which would include electric only, combination, and gas only. But if there's not support for that, I would support doing gas only. I feel like we need to have something for the electric only customers who are not going to get these programs from their gas companies, and also the propane customers. So that's why I would expand it to all customers.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I think it's logical to have it be applicable to all customers, including gas only customers. As staff points out, you know, this kind of would represent an unnecessary deviation from what we already determined in the SI proceeding, which happened just last year. And I think would make kind of the course and purpose of the clean heat plan more difficult by kind of somewhat artificially limiting the pool of customers who would be available to participate in the programs.
I'm not gonna fight it, so you can keep going, Mr. Mendelson.
Okay, but just to record it, is it a 2-to-1 vote?
Yeah, it can be 3-0. I may throw in some concerns and a concurrence.
Okay.
Mr.
I just
Mendelson?
at this point, and I apologize for bringing this up outside of the decision matrix, but I just wanted to note that it is a little confusing for electric only customers, whether they would be able to receive the benefit of an AC replacement. That is, you know, would they not be, would BE programming not be available to change out an AC unit to a heat pump.
Well, it'd
Or-
just be DSM. It'd just be DSM. It wouldn't be BE. So we got to somehow, you know, smooth out and make consistent the DSM with the BE, but they would just be a normal DSM program, right?
That's fine. I just wanted to clarify, and the other commissioners can indicate that makes sense to them. So we would say that an AC replacement with a heat pump is an eligible DSM measure as well.
Yeah. I mean, but you wouldn't call it a clean heat resource because it doesn't reduce emissions on the gas side.
Right. Okay. And
So-
perhaps it's already part of the DSM programming.
I would think, but we should flag that issue and put something in the order saying consistency. Commissioner Plant, would you say that any different?
No, I think that's okay. One of the other things that I did want to bring up, and I know that Mr. Chairman, you raised some concerns about their workload, but I would like in the decision, if it meets with the approval of my colleagues, that we ask the AQCC and the Air Pollution Control Division to look at developing a BE protocol that would allow electric, both electric only customers of Excel that are, causing emissions reductions for whatever the gas company is that is being serviced, or the propane customers. It would create basically an emissions credit that could be traded across companies. So that some of the compliance issues would be addressed, and the same would be true, for your gas only PSCO customers that are being served by a non-jurisdictional electric utility. They're offering various different programs, and we just need some way to sort of allocate these emissions reductions. And so, obviously we don't tell the AQCC what to do, but a request to them, maybe combined with a SIM, so that we can just have this conversation about what the issue is that we're running into and what they, as the air regulators, might recommend as a potential approach.
I mean, I'd strongly support the SIM. I'd want to talk to council and advisors about making recommendations to the AQCC, but Commissioner Gilman, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, not a ton of input here. I think I presume that BE measures will be available to electric only customers. I mean, people are only talking about gas only customers here. Just to be clear, it is beneficial electrification, even if there's someone else's gas customer. It's beneficial electrification of someone else's load, but it's still the same thing in terms of electrifying heating. So
so you're talking about, I thought it was like all electric. But you're talking about combined
The electric only customer. So for example, you're getting served by Atmos. Yeah, you're getting served by Atmos Gas, but you're PSCO electric.
Okay, I see your point. I'm fine with that. Sorry, Commissioner Gelman, anything on the AQCC thing?
No, I mean, there's an interesting whole bit here, which is oddly, this one is more a DSM issue, is high efficiency electric replacement of less efficient electric, but that's more a DSM issue than something we're going to deal with here, which would be, I think what you were getting at, Chairman, which is the better electrification of already electrified people. Different issue.
Does that give you what you need, Mr. Mendelson?
Yeah, I want just to clarify. So we are going to make a request for AQCC to weigh in, and advisors will work to schedule a SIM with the AQCC personnel.
Yeah, I'd start maybe with the SIM and be soft, on the language, explore, consider asking them. So I don't know, depending on the outcome of the SIM, something like that. Ms. Dundas?
I think least resistance path would be to just state in this decision that we will hold a sim in a separate proceeding. I think it might make more sense if there's a sim that happens that it would be either within a follow-on M docket if that's ordered here or separate. But the exact parameters of the sim and the invitation would be decided in a separate presentation from advisors, I think, and not within this decision. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I mean, I feel, I don't know what the right structure is, whether we need to start an M docket in order to have this sim with the AQCC and the APCD, but we've identified an issue and we're not air regulators.
Understood. Just
So-
holding the sim within the public service clean heat plan doesn't make much sense to me, since it might be an issue that affects the other utilities as well.
Yeah. Understood.
All right, let's keep going.
Yep, so the next issue under SEAMS is related to transport customers. Public Service explains that gas transport represents approximately 50% of volume on the company's gas system. These customers or shippers are required to deliver the amount of gas that they consume to the company's system and often rely on third parties, known as marketers, to coordinate the actual purchasing and scheduling of gas. The company views transport customers as falling into three general categories that warrant different policy considerations with respect to clean heat: other local gas distribution companies, electric generating units, and retail transport customers, which they say are similarly situated as retail sales customers. The company has proposed to exclude retail transport customers from clean heat programming or cost recovery, and suggests exploring these issues in an M docket as an appropriate next step. CEO proposes a transfer fee similar to the exit fee enacted in the Winter Storm Uri proceeding in order to discourage switching to transport service to avoid the relevant rider. Denver recommends the company designate all transport customers as eligible for clean heat programming offerings, but appears to agree that issues relating to transport customers should be addressed in a separate M docket. Boulder agrees the commission should open an M docket to address cost allocation and available programming. The company responds to CEO saying it does not oppose the transfer fee recommendation. However, if the commission believes it may ultimately decide to include transport customers in programming and cost recovery, the issue is best left for an M docket. So with that, the decision point is, does the commission agree to open an M docket to handle remaining SEAMS issues, including program availability and cost allocation to transport customers?
Makes sense to me. Commissioner Plant?
Yes.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. This is a somewhat major issue given the legislative exclusion of transport customers from the emissions basis. So it's going to leave a few wrinkles to continue to be figured out. And I think part of this whole objective should be to figure out some more information. We talked about a little bit in the gas forecasting, how it might necessarily have a few versions, which should be based on the same actual data from the GIP to the clean heat, because clean heat does not exclude the transport customers. It's a pretty big difference there. But I think we lack really good, clear data on, we have a rough idea that about 50% of the volume on the company's gas system is made up by transport customers. But I don't think we understand the degree to which, there are leftover large customers that are still taking retail gas, which could really help us understand some of the nuances of the situation in terms of who should programs be available to, who should be paying into programs. So I think an M docket would be a pretty reasonable way to go.
And Mr. Chairman, I don't know if we included the transfer fee in that motion, or if it was just the M docket. But I would.
Well, I put the transfer fee as a potential option for the M docket. Does that make sense?
Is that, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, so we're not deciding it now. It's a decision for the M docket is what I'd say. Does that give you what you need, Mr. Mendelson?
Yes, it does. So the next set of decisions are around cost recovery. The first one being around amortization and return. The company requests WAC return and 15-year amortization for all rebates and other investment covered in its riders, such as NPAs. The company argues the WAC represents the company's cost to finance the rebates and other investments. The company also contends that WAC sends a policy signal to the company to grow its electrification programming and drive adoption. SWEEP and CC suggest that rebates receive a 10-year amortization period and return at the customer deposit rate. Staff calculates a 15-year amortization would turn $1 of investment into $1.71 of recovered costs from ratepayers. Staff opposes the amortization of BE rebates, arguing that the company has a natural incentive to promote BE, whereas they do not have such an incentive to promote efficiency. CEO suggests a 4-year amortization and argues the modification would lower the company's return on investment from 44% to 9%, but only increase customer bills slightly due to shorter amortization period. CEO also notes that Public Service used a WAC of 6.3% in its rate calculations, even though its electric WAC is 6.95% and its gas WAC is 6.7%. Public Service responds that calls for a shorter amortization period by SWEEP and CEO. They argue that the suggested period, their suggested period of 15 years aligns with the useful life of the measures, and it manages rate and bill impacts imposed on customers. The company recognizes that longer amortization periods can be more costly over the long term, they say, but rate and bill stability should take priority here. Public Service takes issue with CEO's return on investment calculation, arguing CEO sums the total of all amounts recovered by customers and compares it to the upfront costs. Such a calculation does not accurately report earnings because it excludes the portion of financing costs using debt. Separately, Commissioner Plant raised the issue of WAC return and/or rider recovery being tied to the implementation of on-bill financing across all customers. Commissioner Gilman responded that she would rather see a broader PIM, perhaps tied to overall effectiveness of the CHP implementation and emission reduction. Advisors note that the company did not request a PIM in this proceeding, and there is no record on how to implement what size PIM would be appropriate, if any at all. I'll ask you to return to the Commissioner Plant's proposal below. I'd also like to note that the company does receive a PIM for its programs funded through the strategic issues budget. Therefore, I'll also make recommendations below to keep SI and CHP budgets separate so that unique company inducements from SI and CHP funding initiatives can be tracked accurately. But for your immediate discussion, the decision point is, does the Commission agree with the company's proposed WAC and 15-year amortization?
I think for me, sort of like what we did with the TEP, I'd probably do the 4 years, but and let's take up the other issues later on the amortization. Commissioner Plant, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think the CEO proposed 4 years is reasonable.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the basic concept of amortization makes some sense here to spread out, essentially the cost of rebates, the support investments, which actually provide prolonged savings. But I would tend to agree with Commissioner Plant. I don't think the 15 years presents a total cost that's reasonable as far as impact to customers. So it also spreads the costs out longer, which as we look at the potential for long-term rate impacts is probably not a good thing. It would be helpful if it's in the more shorter term years, especially I think in years that probably somewhat resemble the same kind of programmatic design and implementation levels. So I think that 4-year amortization is reasonable. The thing I will point out is that amortizing these rebates, at least to my understanding, is a fairly new concept, right? We did that in the TEP. We very largely did it in the first CEP because the company professed they had no incentive at all to gain these sales because at the time we had a revenue decoupling adjustment. That's gone. We maintained some level, but less in the TEP. So now it is here. So probably to the chair's point the other day that some of these things seem to become an entitlement once we do it once. I will say, I have a lot of interest in a PIM here. I think seeing good performance and incentivizing good performance, and in the same note, penalizing poor performance is an important characteristic that we are going to have to look at. I agree, we don't have the record here. So what I'll say is, I see this as a somewhat temporary decision, given the situation now. We don't have a PIM, we don't have another way to incentivize this. However, I'd love to fully acknowledge in the decision that this is not like some decision in perpetuity we expect to show up in every clean heat plan. It would be based on the situation at the time, which I know is obvious, but is worth saying, because I would really like to see us move to an actual PIM structure to look at this more broadly rather than just incentivize the rebates through amortization. But for now, I think it works.
All right, let's not have the PIM conversation now, since I think you tee it up later, Mr. Mendelson. So I think that gives you what you need on this, and we're coming back to the PIM conversation in a bit.
That's right. And can we handle whether WAC can be tied to OBF implementation at that time as well?
Yes, let's.
Okay. Okay, so the next issue is rider recovery. The company proposes 2 new riders to recover the allocable costs from gas and electric customers. They refer to these riders as the CHSGA and CHSEA for gas and electric, respectively. Public Service suggests rider recovery manages and smooths the bill impacts from programming and investments to advance the measures needed to decarbonize the LDC system. The company proposes additional gas DSM, and the incremental cost of recovered methane will be recovered from the company's gas customers through that rider, and that all BE costs would be recovered from the electric customers through that specific rider. The company explains that both riders would have a similar structure and mechanism to the Transportation Electrification Programs Adjustment Rider, or TEPA, which captures the cost of commission-approved TEP spending related to transportation electrification. Staff suggests that the commission approves rider recovery for any CHP costs, it should utilize the existing gas and electric DSM-CA riders instead. Staff contends there is sufficient overlap between the activities the company proposes through its CHP to justify this approach. They also contend that rider recovery should be limited to the recovery of costs that serve the core purpose of clean heat plans and not market transformation projects that the company acknowledges the statute does not explicitly require, or additional measures like CNG that are not enumerated in statute. CEO also suggests the company collect clean heat costs through the existing DSM-CIA riders. Staff further suggests that the commission should apply an asymmetric carrying charge, whereby ratepayers earn a carrying cost at the company's WAC on over recovery, but the company does not earn a return on under recovery. Such a structure would incentivize the company to avoid over and under recovery and is consistent with the existing transportation electrification and transmission riders, the TEPA and TCA. The company replies that transparency around the impacts of clean heat, a significant new undertaking by the company, is an important reason to make clean heat cost recovery a clear and separate line item on gas and electric bills. Public Service also claims there is also substantial complexity in potentially combining clean heat cost recovery into the existing DSM-CA riders, and at least at this juncture. They explain that, among other things, the DSM-CA costs are not amortized, and the DSM-CA includes spending on programs that have little direct relation to clean heat, such as electric energy efficiency. Public Service suggests that it would be more appropriate to open an M docket than attempting a full integration of the riders now, which may have the unintended effect of impeding implementation of this clean heat plan. They contend in its inaugural TEP proceeding number 20A-0204E, the company proposed a TEP revenue requirement in the DSMCA for reasons similar to those raised in staff in this proceeding, and the commission rejected that proposal, requiring the company to create separate to collect TEP costs separately. The company also suggests that it can combine the clean heat and DSM riders at a later time once the technical issues were overcome. So with that, first decision point is, does the commission approve the creation of 2 new riders to recover the clean heat costs from gas and electric customers?
Commissioner Plant? Want me to ask Commissioner Gilman first?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm reading through my notes on this.
Commissioner Gilman, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, look, this relationship is complex. I think gonna get more complex, but as I stated before, I mean, given the resources that appear to be cost effective here, this looks very much like an augmentation. DSM and BE. I worry there's potentially more complications in making it a separate rider than in combining it with the DSMCA as CEO and staff suggest. So I think the best route to go right now is to combine this into the DSMCA. I think you create more issues if you're effectively doing the same exact programs, the same exact things to the same pool of customers with 2 totally different riders. I think that is actually far more convoluted and complicated than including these activities, which essentially are the same as are being done in DSM currently with the existing DSMCA.
I don't really know. Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I mean, I agree there. I mean, we have in the DSMCA, we have, DSM and BE, which is the bulk of this, plus DR. And I feel like, what we could do is combine this into the DSMCA, but then also, as was recommended, open up an M docket and look at how, going forward, we might be able to consolidate these processes and the riders, maybe move DR into a more appropriate, different rider recovery, and consolidate everything under either CHP or DSMCA. I mean, right now DSMCA is what we already have, so I think it makes sense to go ahead and do that, but then try and clarify the process out into the future through a different proceeding.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many riders, it's really difficult to approve another 2. But I just don't know what the technical issues are, whether it's allocating costs to gas versus electric customers. And I know when it first got set up, it was allocated on a dollar basis. So I don't even know how it equitably allocates between customer classes. I mean, it's just where our starting point is. I'm okay starting in the DSMCA and, trying to use an M docket to figure out a longer term solution. But I suspect we're going to see something on Triple R that may cause us to rethink it. So is that an okay solution with you, Commissioner Gilman? Will, in this decision, put it in the DSMCA, ask the parties to do the best job they can, and put this as another issue on the M docket to see if there's a better long-term solution.
I think that's reasonable.
Mr. Mendelson, you want to keep us going? You're on mute.
Yeah. There's a couple other decision points on the riders. Does the commission agree with staff that rider recovery should be limited to the recovery of costs that serve the core purpose of clean heat plans? and that is not vertical 2 market transformation.
Why don't I go to Commissioner Goman? You may be judging by your furrowed brow, Commissioner Plant. Maybe we'll start with Commissioner Goman.
I feel like we already decided that, but yeah.
I think that vertical 2 could be included, especially given that we've really narrowed it to things that actually are clean heat resources. I think that's applicable. And essentially we didn't include others, so that is probably a moot point at this point in time, but I would be willing to include the market transformation initiatives, because I think our decision point previously essentially narrowed it already to clean heat resources.
Good with that, Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. The next decision point on riders is, does the commission agree with staff to apply an asymmetric carrying charge that is whack on over recovery and no return on under recovery?
I think on this one, I'm okay with that, Commissioner Goman.
Yeah, I'd adopt staff's position there, and I'd also point out that's consistent with the TIPA and the TCA, which are probably relevant riders to be looking at as well. So I think that's reasonable.
Any concerns, Commissioner Plant?
No, I absolutely agree, and particularly in light of, the way that, we're proposing to structure the budget. We don't want to have over recovery, and I think that this puts in a disincentive for over recovery.
Mr. Mickelson, you keep moving.
I just wanted to follow up. So, between the way this flat budget would work and then this mechanism, so they would only be charging customers based on actual expenses incurred, but they would have this budget available to them that they could flex between years.
Yes.
But then anything above that level of flex would be required in the check-in process. Is that it's
yes. Ms. Dundas?
So
Sorry.
anything above the
Weekend.
100% flex is available? I'm just unclear what the check-in process does at this point.
Well, it looks at the, go ahead, Commissioner Plant.
I was going to say, I think the check-in process looks at the annual, right? It's on an annual basis, looking at what was recovered versus what was expended. Is that right?
The rider check-in process or the 2026 check-in process?
No, the rider check-in process.
There isn't really a rider check-in process. I would suggest that there is hopefully with this mechanism in particular, the company will come forward with quarterly or semester riders that facilitate the cost recovery of expenses just incurred. But to the extent we're allowing this flexibility between years, and maybe they're completely separate points, but I think we just need to be clear that how we're allowing the flexibility and what then, I guess, what's expected in the check-in process, the flexibility check-in process.
I mean, are you bringing us back to the budget discussion?
I guess I am. I apologize. I guess I just wanted to make sure that,
Let's just, we're going to come back to that anyway.
Okay.
Not get mired down in the same.
I think I was premature as well. I apologize.
Okay. And then we'll also, as far as tying the rider recovery to the OBF platform, perhaps we'll do that.
That's a later conversation. Let's just take all the OBF thing up at once and not like piecemeal it into every conversation.
Fair enough. Okay. Okay, so the next issue is on cost allocation for beneficial electrification expenses, and whether that would be just by electric customers or by electric and gas customers. Public Service proposes recovery of BE costs from its electric customers only, and says it has multiple reasons for doing so. It is the only method that requires gas customers who fully electrify to pay their share of beneficial electrification program costs, and it is the only method that does not force gas customers remaining on the system to pay subsidies to electrify customers who leave the gas system. Mr. Eiley further states that recovering BE costs from the electric system is the only method designed to work over the long term in a high electrification world in which a majority of customers leave the gas system entirely. Staff notes that in the SI proceeding 22A-0392EG, the Commission adopted an allocation whereby, which included a set of criteria, including cost for measures and programs that seek to electrify existing gas end uses are allocated 50-50 to electric and natural gas customers. Staff recommends the Commission mirror this thoughtful and reasonable approach here in the CHP and recognize that BE provides benefits and imposes costs on both gas and electric ratepayers. Further, because the company has approximately the same number of gas-only and electric-only customers, the 50-50 allocation serves to not disproportionately burden either group. SWEEP and CC suggest the company recovers 75% of BE costs from gas customers and 25% from electric customers. CC states that the gas rate base should shoulder the bulk of compliance costs because it is the gas utility that must reduce emissions. SWEEP suggests that gas customers should not be allowed to avoid paying for emission reduction requirements, which would keep gas bills artificially low. CEO recommends that beneficial electrification costs be recovered from electric customers, consistent with the company. Public Service responds to arguments made by SWEEP and CC, stating requiring gas customers to pay for former gas customers' heat pumps does nothing to reduce the remaining gas customers' emissions. Rather, it just pushes their costs upward. He contends SWEEP's purpose of its arguments appear to be to raise gas bills and questions whether this will actually spur more electrification as SWEEP appears to hope. Regardless, Mr. Eiley contends it is inappropriate because it disconnects the group of customers receiving the benefits of BE, that is, those receiving heat pump subsidies, and the broader electric customer base that sees relatively lower rates due to increased electric energy consumption from the group of customers who pay, that is, those remaining on the gas system. So the question before you is, how should BE costs be allocated amongst gas and electric customers?
I'd probably just split it 50-50, Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you. I think the 50-50 split for the combined customers is, one issue. I think we also have two other issues. So that the gas only customers and the electric only customers that are serving other utility gas customers. So I would just propose, I think that 50-50 is fine for the combined. I would say for the gas only customers, they're being served more than likely by an electric utility that is also offering some BE incentives. So I don't know that the incentive needs to be the full 100%, but maybe 50 or 75%. And then for the electric customers, I think what we've seen is that the gas utilities are not offering any BE. So I would just put 100% for the electric only customers. But interested to hear how Commissioner Gilman's thinking about that as well.
And just a clarification, Mr. I mean, this is just this decision point is not like by customer. It's just allocating costs across the businesses. Am I wrong about that?
This is just allocating costs across the businesses. And I will note that trying to divide up whether customers are combination customers or gas only customers within the DSMCA, I can envision complexities there, Commissioner Plant, that I think we'd get a surprise that may be difficult to do. Essentially all customers, whether they're gas or electric, receive, and they're in the same rate class, receive the same rider.
But and to me that's like a different issue. That's like a cost. It's like you take the revenue requirement and then you allocate it to different types of customers. The decision point in front of us is just how we allocate it between the electric business and the gas business. Am I wrong about that, Mr. Mendelson?
No, that's right.
Okay, then in that case, thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it. I think 50-50 covers us because it's basically gonna do what I was trying to do. Anyway, so yeah.
Commissioner Goen?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think a 50-50 split makes sense, especially given a lot of the arguments put forth by staff and otherwise. Obviously, there were parties arguing for a much higher split for the gas customers. I don't think the company's position here is logical. Essentially, it's not reasonable to assume that gas customers and the gas company should bear no cost for compliance with the statutory target that is entirely on them. So I think, allocating 50% to the electric customers first helps to mitigate some of the rate impact, but also acknowledges its potential that there is a benefit to the electric system by the addition of these customers. That potential is very much in the to be determined category if we can see the company implement effective demand response and other programs to mitigate kind of full capacity impact of adding new loads through diversity of those loads. So I also think some of the arguments put forth that this benefits electric customers seem to ignore some of our struggles as of late to ensure that there really is a focus on the cost-effective addition of load in terms of ensuring we have good demand response and flexibility around those loads. So that to me is a to be determined benefit. So given all those things weighed together, I agree with both of you that the 50-50 split appears to make sense.
All right, Mr. Mendelson, the next issue is the PIM and the own bill financing. Do you want me to just turn this over to Commissioner Gilman or?
Well, I just had a quick preamble in that, based on this decision so far, the company will be receiving two different inducements after this CHP is developed. That is a PIM from the SI spending and amortization and WAC recovery from the CHP proceeding. Overall, advisors are concerned the company does not try to somehow collect both inducement options on both funding sources. Accordingly, we recommend clearly partitioning that benefit and by finding a pathway to a single consistent inducement approach for all spending in BE and DSM programs.
And I guess Commissioner Gilman, we don't really have much of a record here. So it seems like, we're going to try and provide some guidance on a PIM and maybe put it in the M docket, but wherever you'd like to take it, Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Thanks. Especially given as Mr. Mendelson pointed out, there's an existing bonus structure in DSM, albeit based on a much lower level of DSM than we're talking about now. I think probably about half on an annual basis. So the whole thing sets up, and then this probably to the point that eventually seems like these probably do get combined because the overlap is probably too much to deal with separately. As it stands right now, we have this DSM bonus, which the company could get just for achieving their goals there. It may well be the same exact programs, the same type of rebates, the same everything that is now the CHP actions piled on top. So I'm not sure how they don't just cherry pick kind of the most cost effective looking stuff to get the bonus, even if they don't get to DSM levels anywhere near what's needed when you add the clean heat plan on top of it. I don't know that can be unwound right now for the effective bonus we have in this version of everything. But I certainly agree that I think we should be moving to a structure where there is one overarching kind of benefit and penalty structure rather than segmenting. I think segmenting it probably only sets us up for the potential for some gamesmanship on the part of the people who have all the data and numbers. And, it becomes very difficult for us to kind of actually police and partition what is happening here or there. At the end of the day, I think all of these actions feed together and should be governed by an overarching penalty and benefit structure. We don't have the record here for that, which is disappointing, because I did bring this up in the DSMSI proceeding. This is my passion to get to an overarching structure for this. So just as some guidance, like I think it would make sense to take this up in docket as we come out of here, or you know, open to your suggestions, Mr. Mendelson, on where the appropriate place to kind of take up a PIM discussion is, if that feeds into, you know, whatever next proceeding. But to me, as some general guidelines, a PIM mechanism that could get provided or proposed later should tie to the actual emissions relative to the statutory emission reduction targets. It should also place some weight on effective and cost-effective implementation, which would track BE adoption levels relative to the CEO roadmap that we've identified as the basis for some of these decisions. It should track IQ and DI participation, as we've identified that cost mitigation, particularly for those customers, likely rests on them being able to participate in a fulsome way in these programs. And so we should ensure that the company has a very effective means to get them participating. We can include on-bill finance, or, you know, whatever flavor and acronym you would like for the concept of allowing a customer to pay over time on their utility bill for one of these expensive improvements. And another focus on, you know, really keeping rates as low as possible, given the many difficulties of this transition, by focusing primarily on the most cost-effective reductions and measures to make as much ground as we can in the most cost-effective way. So those would be some of kind of the governing criteria that I'd suggest that we outline, and open Mr. Mendelson to a suggestion of where the most appropriate place to like see a proposal would be, given those guidelines.
Well, just quickly, we are potentially looking at a stakeholder process that is expected to potentially implement the design changes that we're requesting here. So that it could be something they take up. It also could be an overwhelming, expectation to ask them to design a PIM with such requirements. But I think could at least give them an opportunity to start looking at the possibilities and maybe bring us something that works.
I think ultimately we're going to be looking at an integrated DSM-SI, clean heat plan, SI, probably in 2026. But Commissioner Plant, anywhere you'd like to go?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the question here is also, the various PIMs that we have out there, the various programmatic and performance requirements that we want to provide a benefit to the company for achieving, or a penalty for not achieving. And I think what Commissioner Gillen's kind of describing here, I think is a really good effort for us to undertake. I would maybe broaden it to just talking about performance-based regulation. I don't know if everything that we're talking about here is best constricted to a PIM, or whether we want to consider other mechanisms that basically would achieve the same thing. Like you said, there's so many different proceedings with so many different PIMs, many of which kind of cross over into other proceedings, and then we've got the emissions stuff on top of that, which we want to try and avoid double counting. And it seems like we maybe want to just reconsider or consider the entire structure and how that might be integrated into some sort of a larger mechanism for rewarding or penalizing performance.
I'm a little scared of that. 3 or 4 years ago, we opened up a mother of all rulemakings to try and reform our ERP roles, and the world completely passed us by while the rulemaking was open over like 2 years or 3 years. But I hear you. It's very piecemeal, and it's very frustrating. And I'm happy to put some language in the order asking the parties for guidance on that. Commissioner Gilman, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could more generally refer to performance-based rate making, aimed at advancing these goals or these kind of major metrics. Yeah, I mean, I get like we somewhat view the amortization of rebates as a performance rate-based rate making in a way, a roundabout way of you make money off of handing out rebates, which was different there. So I'm fine to think of it in that way. Look, I agree. I think the piecemeal approaches are pretty frustrating with regard to like an entire kind of ecosystem of PIMs out there, which is why I focused on the gas system as well as on the electric system of can't we get to a carbon reduction PIM based off of approved plans as the baseline and the cost effective hitting of those based on the approved plans. So to me, that is a helpful, like, that's why this discussion is meaningful in that I'm not aiming to just do one more PIM. It's can we focus on the goal? Let's focus on the goal in this sector and make one much larger PIM instead of a bunch of piecemeal little ones. I agree. I don't think it benefits the commission to have a million little piecemeal little ones. Because it's difficult to keep track of, yet that's what we get proposed here and there. So I see this as a little bigger than just one piecemeal one, where I'm trying to take really the main target of the sector and say, let's make things about this goal rather than the independent DSM bonus and the independent amortization of rebates and all these little parts. Let's put it together to one thing that we can actually track and govern. That probably should be symmetrical in terms of a penalty and a bonus. So yeah, the goal would be here to simplify by keeping our eye on the main targets rather than have a lot of piecemeal parts.
I guess Commissioner Plant, what do you want to do? It sounds like we've got the basis of some PIM language for the order, and to the extent there's differences, we can work it out on the TBC process. I'm probably going to struggle to limit progress, the return and amortization period to progress on bill financing. Do you have language you want to do on bill financing in the PIM context, or would you like to take that somewhere else?
Yeah, it's frustrating because I know that we've been
About it. 20 years, 30 years.
And I feel like, to a point that was made earlier, what's the company's commitment to achieving these objectives that we have? Clearly it feels like the company doesn't have much of a commitment to trying to achieve the things that we've been trying to achieve on bill repayment. And to a large extent, the world is passing them by on this. I think, the Tri-State and CEO have developed a program that looks a lot like, the kind of thing we've been trying to get Excel to do for a long time. And, Excel has said in their proposed docket on bill financing that they want to, follow that model, but they also want to limit it much more than what is being offered to those other customers. And it's just my intention of is that we're being asked by the company to give them this favorable recovery in the form of riders and in the form of WAC, and yet we can't get favorable programs for customers. And it's it's annoying to, be consistently saying, yes, we'll give you this when we don't get the thing we've been asking for over and over again.
Well, you want to, well, all right. So how about this? One of the factors that in 2026, when we look at this, one of the factors that I mean, you can't retroactively apply it to investments already made, but one of the factors that govern the future amortization period after that 2026 period is their success in implementing on-bill financing in the next 2 years.
I could
I,
support
I,
that.
what do you think of that? Making stuff up on the fly, Commissioner Gilman. What do you think of that? Oh.
Yeah, here come the lawyers.
Maybe not.
I'd suggest if you're going to relook at the cost recovery structure, then you're going to need an application and not a check-in process based on comments.
Yeah, probably fair.
Sorry, I was taking a note on a different question. Give me your the question again.
Oh,
Yeah, I think what Ms. Dundas is saying is that if what the chairman was proposing is that we could use their ability of achieving the on-bill finance program that we've been asking for in 2026 during the check-in process. But what Ms. Dundas was saying is that that would probably require a full litigated proceeding as opposed to a quote-unquote check-in. So I don't know that that's. What I was thinking in terms of, as we were just talking about this period in which we evaluate whether or not there's been over recovery, in the rider, and then if there has been over recovery, then that money is credited back to the customers at WAC. And, is that we wouldn't count any money that was for our residential customers if they weren't offered a financing option. And that's kind of what I was getting at, is that it would be built into this evaluation of the rider and whether or not those were allocable costs, and so that there would be at least an incentive for the company to get this program in place so that, they could then count that money as, being a part of their rider recovery at WAC.
And, I just to respond to Ms. Dundas, again, if we integrate this check-in with the 2025 DSM-SI and push it back into 2026, that would be in the form of an application and would enable us to do what you're talking about. So, it sounds like we're not going to get to finalizing anything more on the budget, but maybe the 2026 thing should be an application. And if we combine it, like I say, there'll only be, it's no additional application. I don't know, Commissioner Gilman, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out the 2026 issue. If it's an adjudicated check-in, I don't get how we're not just relitigating the whole clean heat plan, which might be fine. That might be the direction.
I think what we're talking about is, evaluating their compliance with our request to have an on-bill repayment program. And if it weren't there, then we would make that a part of the 26 DSM, maybe just like we made it a part of the 24 DSM. And we made it a part of the 22 SI, and a
lot of frustration. All right. I think we're pretty clear on the PAM. I think that'll be in an M docket. I think well, go ahead, Commissioner Gilman.
Let me just give you one thing. If we actually got to a point of success of having an overarching performance-based rate-making strategy here, if on-bill financing really presents the greatest opportunity to get widespread adoption, especially get widespread adoption amongst the IQ and DI communities, if those goals were appropriately set, presuming that should happen and what outcomes you could get, I just want to point out, I think there would or could be an inherent penalty if those or support if those were or were not in place in a timely manner. You know, if you base kind of the adoption curves and the expectations on having the help of a program that I think the general sentiment here is helps to speed adoption, especially among lower income customers. I just want to say, like, that's not different, right, than having a PIM structure that kind of aggressively incents making it happen that fast and that widespread. That might be a tool that if they don't use in their toolbox, inherently makes achieving those objectives difficult. So just to say, like, there's a ton of overlap there with the idea of an overarching PIM in terms of incenting behavior that really actually gets you to the goals and gets you to the goals in a cost-effective way.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can accomplish this same thing through, you know, a good, you know, performance-based system, you know, that would include program design and include, you know, the ability to access on-bill financing for, I would say for all customers. I think if you're talking about a, you know, a $20,000 investment, I mean, that's a difficult thing, you know, even for the non-IQ, even more difficult for IQ and more important, you know, there. So, you know, I think that we can get at this incentive / disincentive within that kind of a proceeding that we've talked about establishing. And you know, I'd be willing to, you know, drop my request for this in this proceeding if we can move ahead with that in another proceeding.
Mr. Mendelson?
A couple of items. One is with respect to the rider recovery, we could make that temporary and say it's available through 2026, for example, if you're expecting a 2026 you know, a review, so that and I know Commissioner Plant, you were concerned that it go on forever. So this would, you know, they'd have to come back in with a request to continue it.
Well, that's the next item on your decision matrix, right?
Well,
Know that we want to push ourselves to a, you know, to a litigated proceeding in 26 if we're approving the CHP through 28.
well, it sounded like we were requiring them to do an application anyway in 2026 if we're combining.
That was my suggestion. I don't know that it got another vote.
You mean for the DSM or for the DSM, the next DSM SI, or for the next CHP? Because I think that's another issue that we're deciding.
Well, what I heard before was that the commission was considering combining the next SI proceeding expected in 2025 with this flex check-in process.
I suggested it. I'm not sure that that's been properly vetted with counsel or advisors. I think
Just one decision, just one piece of detail, just to add to that discussion of the additional dockets, is in the last SI proceeding, 23A-0392EG, you ordered the filing of the next SI in 2025 for alignment with the ERP. So that's just one more moving part to consider here, is if you move that SI proceeding back to 2026, we'll have to modify that decision and also take into consideration the reason why you moved it to 2025 in the first place.
Keep trying to
forgot
align these things.
It's a house of cards. I mean, the frustration was you essentially, when you do an ERP, you know, you're looking back at the demand response largely set in the SI proceeding. So I think we wanted a pretty fresh SI proceeding to go into a 2026 ERP.
And just for the time being, Commissioner Gilman read off a number of criteria that she would like to see for a PIM if the stakeholders want to try to tackle the issue. Is that something the rest of the commissioners want to include in the decision for stakeholder guidance?
I strongly support that.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so and we'll bring back the logistics issues, although we're now into regulatory pathway, which includes all these logistics issues. So we'll do our best, but I think we're going to have to take up a fair amount of this at the next CWM and hopefully find a pathway that works. The first issue under regulatory pathway is the on-bill financing. In the
View that as us having had that conversation. So why don't you skip to the next one?
Well, the one thing that's distinct is that there's been some back and forth. The environmental organizations suggested, one process. The company has suggested in the 0589 proceeding to file an OBF specific application 60 days after that proceeding is complete. And although, we're trying not to cross-contaminate dockets too much, I think it would be helpful if the commission can indicate if that is a reasonable resolution of the OBF implementation process.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of forced into that situation. I mean, at the end of the day, we asked them to come up with an OBF for this DSM filing. The company came in with their plan and said, we want to file something in a year. They went through this big, long discussion, and then, what they've come up with is 60 to 90 days after the finalization of the decision, which lo and behold, it ends up being a year from when they submitted their initial plan. Basically, it's what they were proposing in their plan. And we're left without many tools. I mean, if it's not a part of the DSM decision, which, we haven't gotten the DSM decision from the ALJ yet, then, having it as a part of a separate proceeding 30 to 60 or 60 to 90 days after the finalization of that decision, I guess is the best we can do. I don't know what our other options are. I mean, what we're talking about doing is saying, okay, you have to have this proceeding. We're going to have a decision. We're also going to talk about, incentives and disincentives to actually deploying this product that doesn't exist yet, which I think is probably the best we can do, unless you guys can think of some other pathway.
Mr. Mendelson?
Well, I'm slightly concerned that that kind of gives this like a very uncertain time period, if that proceeding continues. So what we could do is generally agree to that and then but suggest a date certain, no later than January 1 of 25, if that works for council. But that does not work for council.
I mean, I just suggest you tread lightly here because it is an active issue open in the other proceeding, as well as if what ends up there happening is the ordering of filing of an application, to put deadlines or next steps after the implementation in this decision could lead to some prejudgment concerns about what you do with that application there.
I don't think we're deciding anything we didn't decide before we put it in the case. I'm willing to take the risk of a little prejudgment to get this issue moving. So I don't know. I'd probably just put the deadline in and do as you suggested.
Okay.
Sorry, is that a deadline for filing or a deadline for implementation?
For filing.
Okay.
They're going to be filing an application letter for this on-bill repayment program. And I'm not sure what the timing is for the DSM decision and all that stuff that's associated with that. I don't know. If we picked no later than November 1, no later I don't, they've said they were gonna, I thought they said in their filing that they wanted to submit their plan, their application letter in September. But then there's also been discussion of 60 to 90 days, so I don't know.
The 250 runs on 589 EG in September, so 60 days. So assuming no triple R at the commission, you're looking at mid-November for 60 days after that 250.
So let's just pick mid-November as a deadline.
Mr. Mendelson, you okay with that?
I'm okay with that. If the commission is.
Commissioner Goman?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Look, I'm sensitive to Ms. Dundas's issue here, but this has gotten messy and complicated as continued delay tactics tend to get. So it is a frustrating situation. And I think to Commissioner Plant's point, there has to be a finish line somewhere. We cannot have continually see these delay tactics and to some degree games from proceeding to proceeding to proceeding to make everything take longer. So I think we've got enough history here to say there's a firm deadline.
Yeah, to be clear, I was more concerned about a firm deadline for implementation since you don't know how that application proceeding will go, but understood. Thank you for listening.
All right, where are we, Mr. Mendelson?
We are at incorporating this CHP decision and any stakeholder process to implement it. So the environmental organization suggests that regardless of the portfolio selected, the commission should initiate a process to incorporate this CHP decision into the 2024 DSM-BE plan. They recommend the commission specify the company must must do the following after the final decision. Within 45 days, convene at least 2 stakeholder meetings to discuss how to incorporate this CHP decision into the DSM plan, circulate an initial proposal at to stakeholders at least 7 business days before the first stakeholder meeting. In the event the BE program eligibility guidance differs between the BE and CHP proceedings, include in their proposal how they will administer programs with different eligibility criteria without creating barriers to program participation. Allow for stakeholders to submit written comments based on the initial filing, and within 90 days submit a revised informational filing that is filed as a notice into the DSM-BE proceeding and describes the company's plans for rebate amortization, expected new program or measure additions, clean heat budget allocation by program, and estimated impacts on DSM and BE achievements. Now, the company did not come in with a clear implementation plan in its director rebuttal cases, but did respond through the DSM plan proceeding. They say, after receiving a commission decision on the CHP, the company may begin augmenting its existing rebates using clean heat funding. Any other changes such as to equipment eligibility or rebate structure, which are topics of discussion in this proceeding, that is the plan proceeding, would not be implemented until this plan proceeding is concluded. Historically, the company's not been required a 60-day notice to implement bonus rebates, but for transparency, the company would submit an informational filing detailing the new rebate amounts. So the overarching decision is, does the commission agree with WRA Sweep CC proposal to require the company to follow the instructions proposed? And does the commission allow the company to augment existing DSM-BE programs with CHP funding until an informational filing can be developed through the 60-90-day process in 0589EG? I'll also note that advisors have a series of recommendations regarding guidance for the stakeholders that we'd like to offer for your consideration.
Given that we're already 5 deliberations into this and probably 8 hours, I just say I support your recommendations and ask that you not read them all. and generally supportive of the WRA sweep CC request. Commissioner Plant, would you say that any different?
No, I agree with that.
Commissioner Gilman?
Mr. Mendelson, did you have something to say?
Well, I know that we've been at this a long time, but I would just suggest that 0589 parties are actually listening to this this discussion, and me reading them aloud could be helpful to them as
Oh, no, please.
sorry.
I mean, it's going to be in the written order. I don't know that you need to. Jeez. Ms. Dundas, do we need to read them aloud?
Yes, I mean, you're supposed to be able to follow the public discussion, and that's the whole point of doing this in public. First of all, second of all, Mr. Mendelson's point is that the 589 EG hearing is next week, and the written decision certainly won't issue before next week.
Fire away, Mr. Mendelson.
As much as I'll be working the whole weekend on reading it.
just remember.
All right, and I'll try to be quick. Okay. Align DSM and BE offerings on incentives, eligible measures, customer eligibility, required forms, marketing, customer finance, and other program design elements so there's minimal potential for confusion among customers, contractors, and other program participants. In essence, DSM and BE program participants' experience should not differ based on the source of the funds or the proceeding in which the commission approved the funds. Prioritize AC replacements with heat pumps as cost-effective and efficient first step towards broader electrification. Directly incent contractors to install BE and DSM measures. The commission should suggest that parties consider contractor incentives at roughly 10 to 15% of customer levels. Set and/or modify in the future incentive levels for customers and contractors so that annual BE adoption levels at a minimum reach the yearly CEO roadmap values. Adoption levels of BE should be tracked and reported by, at a minimum, ASHP, CCHP, and HPHW categories. And appliance incentives should be available at the time and place of purchase if procured at a retail seller. Ideally, a significant majority of contractors that work in the public service territory should be eligible to receive incentives. Planning and reporting of BE and DSM should always include the number of measures adopted, the appliance being replaced if applicable, the utility cost of each measure adopted, the projected energy and emission savings of each measure adopted, the unitized cost of energy and emission savings, and the total measures adopted as a percent of the applicable total market activity in the public service territory, as reasonably determined. Because the company is likely to receive for the time being different inducements from an implementation of BE and DSM, it should clearly track the expenditure of funds in which budget they fall under. Expenditure should not receive both inducements, PIM and amortization available from the SI and CHP proceedings respectively. SI and CHP should be spent in the following order. SI funds as specifically approved under the Commission's decision in the SI proceeding, C-23A-0492EG, before inclusion of the flexibility budgets. CHP funds, then CHP funds as specifically approved under this CHP decision before inclusion of the flexibility budgets. 3, the flexibility budgets approved here in this CHP, and then 4, the flexibility budgets approved in the SI proceeding. The flexibility funding should produce proportional energy savings and/or emission reduction on a unitized basis as the primary funding for all resources, unless the company can explain the necessity to change the unit values embedded in the approved primary funding levels. They should assess the split incentives issues to determine the number of IQ and DI customers separately that own their homes versus rent, and whether landlords are properly incented to invest in BE and DSM in these communities. They should acquire cost information of measures installed from participating contractors, as well as square footage and age of home, measured capacity in cooling tons or other other metrics, installation location, and other data to support refinement of incentives without being a burden to contractor participation. Program implementation should allow and leverage third-party implementation entities where reasonably possible to expand customer and contractor awareness of and participation in DSMP programs. Third-party implementers may be paid for signing up eligible contractors and customers. Cost recovery, including a reasonable company inducement, should be aligned across funds initiated for both SI and CHP applications over the next 12 to 18 months. In essence, the company should be provided a consistent and clear financial signal to run the programs effectively and efficiently with an appropriate level of collaboration and oversight from stakeholder parties. Ideally, cost-effective evaluation should be aligned across funds initiated from both SI and CHP applications over the next 12 to 18 months. The Commission could consider opening a rulemaking docket to assist options and approaches given statutory requirements and pros and cons of alternative CE test and evaluation approaches. So thank you for allowing me that, Chair Blank. I think it could be helpful.
Grudgingly. Exhaustedly, Commissioner Plant.
I agree again.
Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I just want to, I know that it took some time. I had a feeling that intervention would result in him reading out his suggestions, but just to say, like, this application came in with really no detail about what these programs will be, how they'll be implemented. So I do just want to point out, like, while this is a long list and it's somewhat frustrating in the millionth hour of deliberation, I think it's very important because, like, the devil's going to be in the details here as far as if these programs are really able to achieve the sort of success that we hope they will. And I think a lot of Mr. Mendelson's suggestions are based off of information in this record, previous experience, like things that need to really be considered. And the further we are away from setting our, like, very clear and precise expectations for public service in this follow-on filing, I think the more arduous that process becomes. So I think in total, this should be a time savings, Mr. Mendelson, thank you for the detail, to ensure that whatever we get in after this more closely mirrors what we expect. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we're poised to approve a very large budget here with an astonishingly little amount of detail about what actual programs they will run. So this follow-on process is very important to ensuring that we can actually get towards success in the way that we're viewing it. And I think this paints that in a much more focused way. So I agree with your recommendations, Mr. Mendelson, and thanks for the detail there that you painstakingly put together.
I agree as well. You're muted.
My apologies. Yeah, we're down to the last few items here, so appreciate getting through it. The next issue is third-party implementation. Boulder suggests the Commission should begin exploration of a third-party implementation model should public service fail to make adequate progress towards its targets. Boulder contends public service approached this proceeding as if it were a two-phase process like an ERP, although there is no phase two. In essence, according to Boulder, public services asked for a blank check with limited process and oversight to ensure prudency as to how that check gets spent. And I know we've discussed this a fair amount, but to the point of the third-party implementation, if the Commission had some quick thoughts on that.
Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I think that at the 26 check-in process, we can give an indication based on, the performance of the company, their ability to roll out these programs, to achieve adoption levels, to provide, financing options, all that sort of thing. We can give an indication if in the next DSM filing or the next whatever it is, if we've combined things, that, we would want to hear proposals from the parties around third-party implementation if we feel like we're just not getting where we need to get to. I guess that's sort of what my take on this would be. I think it needs to be a fully litigated issue if we were to go forward with it.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. As I said before, I think Boulder brings up some very important points here. And I do have some real reservations with regard to the question you teed up earlier, Chairman, on the company being kind of the sole purveyor and promoter of programs that I am not sure I've seen any evidence that they fully support or intend to promote. So that is pretty difficult. I think our option right now is to take a bit of a wait and see approach in that we're approving the Clean Heat Plan here. And we don't have the record or any structure to set up a third party administrator role now. But I think it's something we need to continue to vet, and probably look fully at perhaps in the next DSM BESI filing, which is the next, fully litigated filing handling much of the same issues, so that we can understand, is there a reasonable chance for success here with the plan we have before us and with this model, or do we need to look very seriously at shifting models, which I think is a realistic consideration if things don't go along the lines that we would hope.
I agree with my colleagues and would like to see language along those lines in the order.
All right. The next issue is combining SI and CHP filings. Staff suggests the commission should direct the company to combine its next CHP and DSM SI proceedings into one omnibus proceeding in an effort to improve regulatory and administrative efficiencies. Specifically, staff recommends the commission approve the CHP for 24 to 26 only, and direct the company to combine its next CHP application with the SI application to next summer. Staff contends there is significant uncertainty associated with the CHP, and the commission should avoid locking itself into a 5-year course of action and instead retain the flexibility to revisit the clean heat after the first couple of years of implementation. Staff draws its suggestion from several conclusions that this situation will lead to confusion over whether an individual DSM or BE measure will be treated as DSM or CHP for purposes of cost recovery and calculation of incentives. Second, the proposal would eliminate any duplicative review of such spending caused by keeping the applications separate. And third, staff maintains that combining the proceedings provides a significantly improved knowledge base for stakeholders, the commission, the public, and others to understand and consider the company's DSM BE plan applications with a more comprehensive and holistic foundation set. Finally, staff notes that these proceedings are large and generate significant evidentiary records with many interveners, and that combining like proceedings will allow the commission to keep better track of the issues, testimony, proposals, and suggest combining applications will eliminate confusion in filings and avoid the veritable spider's web effect of facts, decisions, and programs that have become all too commonplace before the commission. The company responds, it will be premature and overly complex to combine the next CHP filing with the next SI filing. It says that approach could create significant complication and impede the implementation of the CHP if the stakeholders must relitigate an entirely new plan in 2025. The company recommends further study the potential overlap between the two proceedings in a miscellaneous proceeding. Public Service contends there will be too little time between now and between a final order in this proceeding and a new filing next year for the company, stakeholders, and the commission to learn from implementation or for other market conditions to materially change the way that can be measured and incorporated into a new plan. So the primary decision point before you, does the commission agree with staff and require the company to file its next CHP in 2025 alongside its SI application?
I'll just read the first sentence of your recommendation, which is, please God, no. With that context, maybe there's a middle ground. I don't know. Commissioner Plant, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, no, I would I would agree with that. I don't think we want to do this next summer. But
2 summers, maybe.
I
Yeah,
do,
next.
as we've talked about, I think there are some benefits to trying to at least align some of the procedures. I don't know that it needs to be aligned with the SI, but aligning with the plan maybe would make a lot of sense. I think right now the plan is to have the next CHP filing be in 2027, which would start the programs in 2029. We might be able to, if we've got a 2025 SI, it's conceivable that we could have our next DSM plan be sort of aligned with the CHP plan and go into effect in 2029. I think right now it's supposed to start in 28, right? But I mean, this one was supposed to start in 24 and it hasn't even had a decision yet. So we're not hitting the starting date for the DSM plan anyway. And I think it maybe would make sense to, have this next CHP in 27, align it with the next DSM and have them go into effect in the same year.
Oh, geez, Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, I'm struggling to understand your proposal for 2026 and kind of how it relates to the other proceedings. So,
Me too.
a little lost on this one, given kind of your suggestion that I don't think I understand in full. So I don't know if you want to
I mean, I'm just,
elaborate or if you have kind of an official suggestion on how these get combined in the future, but I'm not clear.
Yeah,
I guess,
what I'm saying is that instead of aligning earlier, we look at going the full term of the CHP, the full term of the DSM and aligning them at the back end. We align them for the next CHP period and the next DSM period. I think we have, to the point of, the staffs, we don't have enough data to make good projections. I don't know that we're going to have great data next summer to make projections either. I think what we've done is we've put in this flex period at the end of 2026 to adjust based on what we learn over the next couple of years. And that's going to take us out through the end of the 2028 period. We have a 2025 DSM-SI, which is going to get litigated all the way through 2026 and essentially lead to a 27 DSM plan, which would then align it with the 27 CHP plan and, basically pull them together on the back end rather than trying to shorten the period of the CHP to pull them together on the front end. Does that make sense?
Maybe. So we get a filing in 2027 that's a CHP that has some DSMBE flavors. Is it a DSMBE strategic issues?
Well, I think, no, it's not strategic issues. That's coming in 25, but that's going to get litigated all the way through 26. And then what we had last time was we got an SI that was submitted at the end of 22. We, debated that, all that sort of stuff. We ended up with a DSM plan that didn't get submitted until the end of 23. That's effectively being litigated now in 24, which was supposed to be the first year of the DSM plan. And I'm just saying that we're going to be in a similar situation next time where they submit something at the end of 25. They could submit their DSM plan at the end of 26. Or we could incorporate that into the CHP plan that gets submitted in 27 and have it, submitted, maybe in the first quarter or second quarter of 27 so that we can consolidate those two together and then basically start both in 29.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that the two that really relate are the CHP and the DSMBE strategic issues. A standalone plan filing is just operating at a different level. Because granted here, we've got no program details, so we're on no program level right now. So I don't know if I see like combining the clean heat plan with a yearly DSM filing or, you know, even a multi-year. It really is the strategic issues where we're aligning goals and saying, where do these programs need to get, where like, I think, what is the incentive structure? What is the, like, those are strategic issues, to reuse the word. So to me, like, those are the two that are so similar. I don't see like standalone year DSM filings as being super functionally easy to tuck into a clean heat plan proceeding. So
But the DSM SI, I mean, I think the PIM issue, you know, the incentives and stuff, maybe we're going to address in the other M docket. But it could the DSM SI proceeding effectively serve as a CHP phase 1?
I mean, if you wanted to serve as a CHP, it would be a combined CHP DSM SI. I mean, like the way in which it's different, obviously, is you have to evaluate, or you should be evaluating other resources, you know, supply side resources, not conventionally part of DSM SI. I don't necessarily see it as totally unwieldy to eventually combine them. It's just which things are being combined. I'm suggesting the things that actually get combined are CHP and the SI proceeding, not like a individual annual plan proceeding, which is much more about implementation than about like the goals and the big directional, big line budgets, incentive structures, goals for reductions are SI kind of issues typically. So I don't know, Chairman, if I can understand your proposal better with regard to your 2026 filing. I was not 100% clear on what that would or wouldn't
I mean, I'm making this up in real time. It hasn't been vetted by council or advisors, but my thought was to not do the DSM SI proceeding in 2025 and combine it with a check-in, potentially even an app, which you know, which would be an application filed in 2026 that would give us at least a partial look at the issues. You know, as you say, there's not a lot of structure here. So that could give us 2 years of experience and an opportunity to course correct without a full CHP filing. So, and without adding another application to the agenda. And I wouldn't be surprised if the 2026 ERP gets pushed out even further, given what we're already seeing with the just transition plan, and given how long it took to take the 21 filing. So that was my thought, but I didn't come into this with a fully vetted proposal.
Yeah, I'm trying to see what exact issues does that check-in litigate versus what does it not, and is that really enforceable? Like, does that just end up being a CHP? I think it's the real question. Like, you know, if you don't have a way to kind of limit the issues and you're looking at the broader SI issues, it seems like inherent that things will get relitigated. And maybe that's like our destiny. Like, if you take an SI filing in 2025, given the immense overlap of issues and budgets, like, are we essentially relitigating this anyway when we get the next SI filing?
The piece I didn't like about the standalone SI filing is it's just it doesn't make sense to keep litigating these cases individually. So that's why I like combining it with the check-in. Well, I'm not sure there's much further we can do now, and I have a hard stop at noon, Mr. Mendelson. So we're just gonna have to take this up.
Okay,
you
I
know.
wanted to throw one more option into the mix really quickly, though. since we're talking about potentially a 26 SI and then maybe potentially 27 SI and CHP, that we would perhaps require the company to come in early 2027. Forget the 26 check-in. We'll just do maybe a 1/1/27 CHP application with and combined with SI at that time. And we'll have a couple of years of data at that time in order to evaluate the CHP going forward, as well as all the programs going forward.
Yeah, there may be some logic to that too.
Yeah, we'll point out probably the one thing that I know is coming, that I expect and deeply hope is coming in the next SI filing, is that really kind of much more fulsome potential study for demand response, which does feed into the ERP and probably matters, right? So we'll just have to think about the relationship of all these moving parts as we go forward.
Yeah, as well as the potential study just on the DSMVE side. But okay, we'll work with you all through the next week and have to bring this back at the CWM on the 15th. So I think that probably concludes today. I think everything else was kind of really about the flex plan and when the next CHP filing would be and how the flexibility budget would be handled. So, which all seem quite interrelated.
Well, just let Ms. Dundas know she will not be the only one on this call working this weekend.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I just hopped on quickly and didn't stay on just to say that I'll review what rules would need to be waived and what the statutory deadlines are and how that would affect our alignment. But there could be a few decision points next week about rule waivers because some of those deadlines are in roll.
Sounds good. All right. With that, thanks all, and we'll see you next Wednesday, if not sooner.
Okay, thank you.